we started to get into a discourse, actually a bit of a rendition of a discourse for Purim. We'll take it from the top and go through the beginning part a little bit more quickly, as we started it last week, and we will hopefully bring it to its conclusion. We have to be ready for Purim, which is Monday night. An amazing Yom Tov. All right, so this is based on the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. This is from his one of his many books of Ma'amarim, of discourses. So L'chaim. I hope everyone is doing well this morning, this afternoon. Very good. So we started to speak last week about the interesting name of the holiday.
Rabbi,
Yeah, it's done.
I don't have a dictionary in front of me, but obescence might be spelled wrong. It's usually I after E, except after I before E, except after C.
It's pronounced obeisance.
Oh, so then it's E-I, like wait.
Yeah.
My bad.
Yeah, it's all right. It's and I took it from a Sansino version translation, so it could also be a British, but I think that is the spelling. But thanks for the point. And my computer is not marking it as a spelling error, so that's a good sign.
I thought it had something to do with obedience.
Oh no. So obeisance means to bow, prostrate oneself. So it's a funny enough. You'd think it would be associated with obey, but it's not. It's obeisance, and it means to prostrate, to bow down totally before someone. So again, one of the points that this mimer uncovers for us is the name of the holiday, which we discussed last week. It's a curious name, Purim. If we would come up with a name for the holiday, what should we call this holiday? We probably would not pick that Haman had cast his lots, Purim, to find the day to destroy the Jewish people, and it's some Persian word for these lots that were used. And let's use that as the name for the holiday. Doesn't seem to be all that connected, but let's start again. So going back to the beginning of the Megillah, chapter 3, when Haman saw that Mordechai did not bow nor do him obeisance, then was Haman's wrath Haman was full of wrath, and he disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone, for they had told him, the people of Mordechai. Therefore Haman sought to destroy all of the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Achashverosh, the people of Mordechai. In the first month, that is in the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Achashverosh, they cast a pur. The pur, what is the pur? So the Megillah is nice enough to translate it. In the Megillah itself, he peeled pur, he cast a pur. Well, what's a pur? The Megillah says, Hu goral. It's a lot. It translates it into Hebrew for us because it's not a common word. It's not a word that we would know otherwise. So they cast a pur, that is the lot, before Haman, and from day to day to find the proper day, and from month to month to find the proper month. And it came out to the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. And as we spoke last week, interestingly, that so when did, just to get the timeline correct, Haman cast this lot in Nisan. All right? And the day that was selected was 11 months later in Adar. And which day, we discussed this last week, right? The 13th of Adar was chosen. And the holiday was not established on the 13th because what happened on the 13th? The Jewish people were fighting. They were busy fighting to defend their lives. And that was at the end of the Megillah. We talk about the fact, okay, Haman was hanged, but now we have a problem. And that is that there was an edict of the king. And you can't just rescind the edict of the king, which is quite interesting. The whole subplot of the whole Megillah is that once you have the edict of the king, it cannot be rescinded. Well, why not? He's the king. He can rescind his edict. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, but it's an interesting thing that comes up in the Megillah time and time again, that once you have the edict of the king, it cannot be rescinded. Well, they never rescinded the Haman's edict. Do you realize that? It's an interesting thing. Now that we're going to celebrate Purim, and we celebrate the whole salvation, which was amazing, miraculous, of course, but the edict of Haman was never rescinded.
Right.
So what happened? What happened then? The king gave permission to the Jews to defend themselves, and with help from the Persian military, they were able to fight against anybody who wanted to lay a hand on the Jews. They were able to now defend themselves. So it's, again, a very interesting kind of salvation. So it's almost like a salvation that has to come from below. There's sometimes a salvation that comes from above. Passover, right? That's a glorious salvation where we have virtually no part in it. But then you have the salvation that comes from below, where we have a part in it. We have to take part in it. And as there's a very famous poem, that talks about footsteps in the sand. You're familiar with this poem of footsteps in the sand? And anytime you read it, wow, that's so beautiful. It talks about, I was walking on the beach, and God, I saw you were with me, and I saw there were two sets of footsteps. And there was, again, I've checked into it. It doesn't seem to be from a Christian source, but it's definitely Christian inspired, because the idea is the symbolism that the person was walking with God. All right, fine. So two sets of footsteps in the sand. Then as this beautiful poem continues on, but through my most difficult times, God, I saw that there were just one set of footsteps. So where were you? Where were you, God? And God responded that during that time, I was carrying you. And that's why there were just one set of footsteps. So that's, of course, the metaphor for through our most difficult time, God is carrying us. It's a beautiful idea. But I would think the Jewish approach would be quite different, which is when there were just one set of footsteps in the sand, what God says to us is, I am giving you the ability to fend for yourself. I have empowered you to be able to lift yourself out of the morass and to the challenges and the suffering and the whatever you're going through. I have empowered you and given you the ability to pick yourself up. And this is the message in Judaism. Certainly God empowers us, but it's not that we don't do anything. God empowers us. So why am I mentioning this here? I'm mentioning this here that with regards to the salvation of Purim, the decree of Haman was never rescinded. We were given permission to now fend for ourselves, to defend ourselves, and to fight against the anti-Semites and anybody who wanted to lay hand on us, because it was open season on the Jews, but now the Jews were protected, you see. So we had to be involved with that. David, please.
The story that you just said about the one set of footsteps in the sand, it just quickly reminded me of it's about a minute long, that a Jew was walking along the road in Russia 200 years ago, or Eastern Europe, I guess it was Russia, and he's trudging along, and he sees Baruch Hashem, it's another Jew coming by. He's driving a carriage. So he slows down and he says, would you like a ride? He says, of course. He gets on the carriage, on the wagon. The horses are going along. and he's got the suitcase on his lap. So the guy, the driver, the Jew, says to him, "Mister, I'm giving you a ride. Why don't you put the suitcase down?" And he says, "It's big enough. It's a big enough favor that you're doing for me to carry me. I'm not going to make you carry your car. I'm not going to make you carry my suitcase also."
That's a funny story. That is a funny story. I'll have to remember that one.
I heard it from Rabbi Shmuel Mendelson in Florida.
Oh, Rabbi Shmuel, send him regards, please, next time you speak to him.
Okay, thank you. Out of Farbrengen.
Out of Farbrengen, if he remembers me. I was in Miami 40 years ago as a student, a yeshiva student. His wife is Rivka. She was the principal of the school, right? Okay.
Yeah. He's the mashpia of the yeshiva.
Oh, very nice. So this was the miracle of Purim, was that we were given permission to fight for ourselves, right? Okay. So now just another interesting point. So this decree came down in Nisan, and it was a decree that was going to actualize. The decree was going to come into effect 11 months later at the end, right, in Adar. So the whole story of Purim, really, from this point forward, it's all the story of 11 months. It's also interesting that when Mordechai came to Esther and said, "You have to go and speak to the king," right? And Esther said, "I can't go speak to the king. He's not seeing anyone now." So Esther said, "Okay, well, and then Mordechai said, "Well, you have to go anyway, and this is the whole reason why you became the queen." And Esther said, "Okay, well, go and have all of the Jewish people fast. I'll also fast." That fast, it says in the Gemara, that fast actually took place during Passover.
Pesach.
It was Pesach. So she fasted the first, the first and second day of Pesach, and maybe the day beforehand. That was when Mordechai came to her, and that was when she fasted. And that's why it says in the Megillah, everyone should fast for me. They should not eat, and they shall not drink. What does it mean they shall not eat and they shall not drink? If they're going to fast, of course, they're not going to eat and they're not going to drink. But they shall fast, but they should also not eat the matzah that they're required to eat, and they shall not drink the 4 cups of wine that they're required to drink. Yes, Ben-Sion, please.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think when you were talking about you cannot rescind or they wouldn't rescind the king's order,
right,
once he signed it, it reminds me of a concept that we have too. Apparently, he cannot make mistakes. If he rescinds the order, that means he made a mistake.
Interesting. Could be. It's
You know what I'm saying?
you have a corollary in certain laws of the Bet Din as well, that under certain circumstances we don't rescind the act of the Beis Din. Because since it was done, it shows that this was Hashem's will. There are under certain circumstances.
Right.
But interesting. Right. So in other words, it's the idea that he could not make him. That's one way of looking at it, or it's the power of the decree. But that's an interesting point, right? It's that, in other words, it's almost he can't make a mistake by the laws of nature. Since it's a decree, no mistake can be in that. It has to be. So Haman's decree was rescinded. Haman's decree was still not rescinded. So the anti-Semitism is still out there, right? Trying to fulfill it, and it will be rescinded when Mashiach comes.
Rabbi, I thought of another thing in addition to what Ben's saying, is the practical application. The king issues a decree, and it starts to be enforced, or it's going to be enforced, and all of a sudden, through coercion, somebody's trying to force him to rescind the decree, And that's why that law might have been put in place to protect the king from rescinding the decree under coercion of bad guys.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Right. Or good guys in this case. Interesting point, right? It is an interesting point in the Megillah. So the point that we got to last week, that we clarified last week, was that the Jewish people were busy fighting on the 13th. So when did they celebrate? They celebrated on the 14th. You see, since the whole victory was in the hands of the Jewish people were preoccupied on the 13th. That was the day of the decree. So they only could celebrate on the 14th. And that's why the 14th was established as the festival of Purim. In the city of Shushan, in walled cities where you had a lot more anti-Semites, today it might be different. It could be that out in open country, you have more anti-Semites. And in the big cities, you have fewer. I don't know. That may not be true. But anyway, so they asked for an extra day to continue fighting against the people who wanted to do harm. So the king granted an extra day. So they continued fighting on the 14th, and then they celebrated on the 15th. And so it is today in the city of Yerushalayim. They celebrate Purim on the 15th of Adar. So we all know this coming Tuesday is going to be Purim. If you're in Jerusalem, you'll be celebrating on Wednesday. Isn't that interesting? Has anybody ever been in Jerusalem for the second day for what we call Shushan Purim? In Jerusalem, that is Purim. That's the day that they celebrate the entire Purim. Beautiful. Anyway, I've never been there for Purim, so haven't had that experience. But it's something that, you know, we're generally unaware of. We think of this idea of Shushan Purim, oh, it's kind of that extra day. No, it's actually Purim in Jerusalem. That is the day they celebrate Purim itself. So, moving right along. So now let's get back to the mimer here. All right. So the word Purim is an old Persian for lots, and the whole manner in which a lot or lottery works transcends rationality. Take, for example, the temple service of Yom Kippur. A lot was cast to determine which two goats would be pushed off the cliff to certain death, and which would have the distinction of being offered on the altar. Again, this is going back to the Purim, so the Tikkun Zohar says that Purim is actually higher than Yom Kippur, because in the Torah, Yom Kippur is called Yom Kippurim. It's a day, it's a lofty day, and it's Kippurim. It's like Purim. Of course, it's a play on words, because Kippur means it's a day of atonement. But another way of reading it is that it's a day like Purim. It's almost as lofty as Purim. And Chassidus then goes into explaining a similarity here. Where do we see the similarity between Purim and Yom Kippur? We see it in the lots. Both of them had a lottery that was central to the story. What was the lottery on Yom Kippur? The lottery was they had two goats. Both of the goats were identical. They looked identical, they had identical value. And the Kohen Gadol would pick out one piece of wood that would be La Hashem, that would be offered as the sacrifice in the temple, and the other one, La Azazel, that would be thrown off the cliff. So that was, again, a lottery system. Before we cast it, it could go either way. Neither goat was logically more fit for one or the other of the two fates. Only the lot decided the entire affair was altogether beyond intellect. So it was not a matter of merit. It was not a matter of reasonability or reason or comprehension. The idea of the Gorel the lot represents that which transcends reason. So reason is construct, and being unreasonable would either be lower than reason, but Chassidus explains there could also be a level of unreasonability, not super reasonable. It's above reason. And that's the idea of the lot, that it's above intellect. David, please.
Another similarity between Purim and Yom Kippur is that they both focus on an opposite concerning food. Yom Kippur, you don't eat it all, and Purim is celebrated by feasting.
Interesting. Okay. that's kind of I don't know if that's a comparison or a distinction, because I see. So they both have an extreme relationship to food. I see what you're saying. They both have an extreme, right? It sounds like my diets, I diet and diet and diet and diet, and then I go and overindulge, right? So, all right, but that's not your intention, right? So over here, so they both have an extreme relationship to food. That's an interesting point. So ultimately, the Jew is connected to God in the same super rational way, despite whatever inconsistencies there may be in someone's conscious or rational relationship with him. The essential, intrinsic, super rational connection always exists. One can always fall back on it. One can always rely on it. By tapping into it, all shortcomings can be overlooked and forgiven. And this is the Chassidic explanation of the power of atonement of Yom Kippur, is that the power of your atonement on Yom Kippur is so great that it goes to the essential connection of the Jew to God that is beyond how we act. The essential connection of a child to the parent does not depend upon how the child acts. It is the parent always loves the child. And when you can go to that core connection, all of the sins fall away. And that is the power of atonement on Yom Kippur. And even though we have to do teshuvah, but that's almost like we have to do something. Okay, we always have to do something, so we have something to do, and some involvement, and so that it's not called bread of shame. It's not something that we got for free, so we have to do something that's required. But nevertheless, the place of the atonement is not coming from because of our teshuvah, but the place of the atonement is actually coming, Chassidus explains, from the power of the day. And in the statement of our sages, Itzumo shel yom mechaper, that the very essence of the day uncovers the essential connection of the Jewish person with God, and that is the place of atonement, because it's that place where we are loved and accepted unconditionally. And that is the power that erases all of the sins. And this is the power of Purim, and the idea of this lottery system on Purim somehow or another, in some way, is going to also be, this is actually, we're soon going to see, Haman was aware of this super rational connection, and he wanted to attack us at that very level. He wanted to attack us at the level of the super conscious, above all, or super rational, above all, and that's why he was using the Gorel. He said, I know God loves the Jews no matter what. I'm going to go to that no matter what level, meaning using the Gorel, using the lottery, to try to affect or attack us at the most vulnerable, the most essential point. Let's see this in the words of the Rebbe. However, if there is a level at which evil is overlooked and doesn't matter, it would seem that the forces of evil could also draw sustenance from that level. We spoke about this last week, that there are sources of godliness that are so high, and if it's open and accessible, so even evil could draw from that level, once the pipelines of life force are opened. So then even evil, Haman knew that there's a super rational level of relationship to God from which good and evil can draw equally. This is why he cast lots when devising his scheme to wipe out the Jews. He wanted to imitate the relationship that the Jews have with God, to rise to that level where intellect has no say and cannot deny him the power he wants. In other words, if nothing really matters, then let's get rid of the Jews. He wanted to go to that super rational level. If it doesn't make a difference, then evil, it's a level at which evil and goodness are equal. Well, if that's the case, I'm going to try to rise up to that level and get permission, so to speak, to wipe out, annihilate the Jews at their very source. And that's why he drew lots. So the idea of the drawing of the lots was a very specific a plan of Haman, who was an occultist, to be able to get to the very source of the matter, the source of the connection of God and the Jews, and eradicate us from there. Yisrael, Yehudis, please.
Quick question. When you say, when the Alter Rebbe said super-rational level of relationship with Hashem, super-rational level is, at least conceptually to me, kind of vague. Is there any way you can characterize the meaning of super-rational level relative to your diagram that begins with Ein Sof and goes down through Tzimtzum?
Yes, well, it's going to be associated with all of the levels that represent beyond the system. So from the system of Chachma, Bina, Das, right, all of that is going to be the system, and that's the system of reward and punishment, good and evil, light or no light, deserving or undeserving. So everything within what we call Hishtalshalus, that's all going to be our level of reward and punishment, deserving and undeserving. And those who are deserving receive the light, those who are undeserving do not receive the light. But anything that goes beyond that, so coming from the level of Keser, okay? So Keser, the crown level, that's going to be the level of beyondness. I hope
Okay,
does that answer your
you.
question?
Yes, that helps. Thank you very much.
So Esther realized what Haman did not. She knew that there are two facets of the superconscious. True, God is above good and evil. His essence exists outside the context of creation. And the verse says in Job, as for your many sins, can they harm him? Can they harm God? And if you act righteously, will it benefit him? In other words, there is that level of God that is totally beyond what we do, right? I mean, if you have a human being who practices genocide in this world, you know, have you ever seen those videos of a pale blue dot? It's a famous video from Carl Sagan when they came back with pictures of the Earth from far, far away. It was like this tiny little blue dot that was insignificant in the, you know, when you go out beyond our solar system. And so if somebody's practicing genocide on a little blue dot, right, or if you may be familiar with something less astronomical, maybe you're familiar with Horton Hears a Who. It was a Dr. Seuss book. Those are my frames of references. Sorry, either Dr. Seuss or astronomy. But there's a level at which God is totally above and beyond. That's true. But, and this is very important, this is only when we take reality at face value. What we see is that God gives life to all creation, and no moral strings seem to be attached. Good and evil seem to be equally capable of receiving. And there appears to be no advantage in being aligned with one or the other. Okay? So does somebody have to be a moral person to become a billionaire? No. And in fact, it might get in the way. But that's the facade, you see. That's the mask. That's the mask of creation, is that it's a free-for-all. The world is a jungle. That's what it appears. And if you are immoral, you can do immoral things and possibly get away with it. You could be a genocidal maniac or a megalomaniac or a capitalist and oppress others financially. As long as you get your money, you could become very wealthy off of that, very powerful off of that. We have many examples in history. And one could say that is the reality of the world, that there is, that good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people. There is no judge and there is no justice. That is the facade of the world, okay? That's the charade. But the Jew knows to look behind the facade, behind the mask and costume that the world is wearing. The Jew knows that God created the world for the purpose of ultimately revealing himself in it. And whatever creative force he invests in keeping the external forces of the world operative is there only to serve the higher purpose. So the Jew knows that, yes, it appears that there is no difference between good and evil, but we understand that there is a reason for this existence. There's a purpose and meaning behind all of this. And everything is kept going for a higher reason. God needs a running world to serve as a backdrop for the drama of human history. He gives life force to the world regardless of its moral performance. But that life force is only the external dimension of his energy and interest in the world. Okay? And as we spoke last week, it is essential that good and evil receive equally. That's part of God's plan for his purpose to be revealed. It is essential for good and evil to receive equally, or even negative to receive even more, in order for God's purpose to be revealed. Because what is God's purpose? God's purpose is ultimately in the darkness, that we transform the darkness itself into light. And what that means, the darkness in our own mind, in our own perception, that we don't see God, and we have free choice. We have free will to serve God or not to serve God. That perception that we have is what makes our choice valuable and desired by God. God desires us to make the right choice. Why does God do that? God can have whatever he wants, except for our service, you see. That's the only thing that we get to decide, because God constructed the world in such a way. Well, what that means is that good and evil are going to receive equally, or negative might even receive more. God's inner intention is that his presence be revealed in the world, and this is possible only through holiness, through Torah, mitzvah, and the Jews. And that has to be revealed in this world, in the darkness of the world. So on this level, the highest of all evil has no equal rights. So when we're looking at what is apparent, it seems that good and evil are equal. But when you're looking at the purpose, you understand that there is no equivalency at all. A dog might be able to eat from the king's table, but only what is thrown over the shoulder. What that means, this is a concept in Chassidus. This is a concept brought in Kabbalah, that the dogs can get choice meat. They can get amazing food, right? If they happen to be dogs in the palace of the king. Boy, dogs are, it's good to be a dog. But that's not why the meat was created. That is not why the meat was prepared by expert chefs. You understand? So so people can be getting all of these prime cuts of meat, as an analogy, in their life and prospering beyond their wildest dreams. But the question is, did you receive that from God, or did God throw that over his shoulder? This is the terminology used in the Zohar. God, when you, let's put it this way. Let me give you an analogy. Have you given a gift to someone you love recently? How do you give a gift? You are happy and joyous of spirit, and that's where your capital goes, right? Because that's your capital, what you have. You want to share that with somebody else. And so you give them a gift, and you're happy to give them a gift with a joyous countenance. That is your desire, right? So your desire drives it. Now, perhaps you've also paid the IRS. So when you write out the check for the IRS, you are doing it because you're compelled to do so. Now, there are some people, I think it's a good thing. There are some people who say, this is so amazing that I get to participate in this experiment of democracy and I get to pay my fair share, and they're happy about that. And God bless them. There's no problem with that. But most of us normal human beings feel compelled to pay our taxes, right? And we do it. We do it not because we want to do it. It's not driven by desire, but it's driven because we have to do it. So using that as an analogy, there's the light that God desires to give, the light that God gives, the blessing that God gives, right? That is to the Jewish people through performing his will in this world, through Torah and mitzvot. The fact that we're on a planet and that there's free choice, and so evil receives like good, that's all, so to speak, what God is compelled to give. So there's the inner will and there's the external will. So everything is receiving. When we say something is external will, that means you're not doing it because that's what you really want to do. So you're paying your $5,000 to Uncle Sam. That's not because you want to pay that money to Uncle Sam. It's because you have to. If you don't, you're going to get in trouble. And that's called the external will. You want to do it, but you don't want to do it because you want to do it. You're doing because you don't want something bad to happen. Whereas the inner will, the internal will, is giving to someone because you desire to give to that person. So with God as well, there's the external will and the internal will. The external will is this analogy of throwing the scraps to the dog, the idea of throwing something over the shoulder. If somebody gives you something and they just give it over their shoulder, there was no love, there was no intention, there was no desire. That's external will. And so the Jewish people understand that even though it appears the facade is that everyone receives equally, that's only if you're looking at what is apparent. But if you're looking at the purpose, the blessing is going to the Jewish people, the internal will through doing God's will in this world. David, please.
How the person receives what God is giving him, does that have an influence on God as the receiver? In other words, if the person receives it in a happy way or a joyous way or the opposite,
For sure.
that would influence the giver.
For sure. That certainly influences the internal will. And that is why the most horrible things are written in the Torah, because the Jewish people did not serve God with joy and happiness when they had the abundance of all. So the punishment did not come because they didn't serve God. The punishment came because they didn't serve God besimcha, with happiness. Because happiness shows that I understand that I'm receiving this from above, and this is the most amazing thing. So it certainly has an impact. So to sit down and dine at the royal feast, one must be refined, one must be worthy. Esther knew this and took advantage of Haman's ascending to the vantage point where rationality has no sway in order to reveal his true colors. Now we're going to find out his true colors very soon. You're going to be maybe surprised to find out his true colors. In order to prevent Haman from succeeding, Esther did two things. First, she and Mordechai inspired the Jewish people to do teshuvah. As it says in the Megillah, then Esther told them to tell Mordechai, go gather all of the Jews in Shushan and fast for me, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night and day. Wow, 3-day fast. And also I and my maidens will fast. So it was necessary for the Jewish people to delve into themselves and reveal the deeper connection to God than that normally operative. They had to rise to the level of his innermost will. Again, the innermost will, which is through us doing the mitzvah. That's why God brought all of this about. This is the inner meaning of the continuation of the verse. And so I will go into the king, though it is against the law. The soul ascends to its most intimate level of communion with God, with the king, higher than rationality, against the law. This is a very interesting Chassidic interpretation of this idea. The law, as Yisrael had asked earlier, where is this level of, where that's totally unconditional? That's above the level of the law. The law is set by what we call the order of Hishtalshelus, the 10 Sfirot. They create a system and an energy level where everything runs according to cause and effect, dependent upon our actions. Against the law, or so to speak, above the law, is this idea of going into God, who is called the king in the Megillah, where it says HaMelech in the Megillah. The Talmud says this is referring to God. We're going into the king against the law. So we're transcending the law. We're going to that level that is beyond the system of deserving and undeserving. So she did both. First of all, do teshuvah. Now we can that is beyond the law, against the law, in the language of the Megillah. And then she went into the king, and this is what she said. This is taken straight from the Megillah. And Esther, so the king asked Esther, what can I do for you? And Esther answered, if it seems good to the king, let the king and Haman come this day to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Remember the story. Now you're going to see something quite remarkable. Can anybody tell me where we see, although God is not mentioned in the entire Megillah, we do see God hinted to. I'm saying his actual name, the 4-letter name of God. Can anybody find Hashem's 4-letter name here?
Hayom.
What are the initials of Yavo Hamelech V'Haman Hayom?
It's K-Vav-K.
The Yud Kei Vav Kei. We'll just Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. So she said, let the king and Haman come today. And that spells out the 4-letter name of God. And at this point, this is where Hashem's name is alluded to, as we're going to see soon. Then the king said, make Haman hurry, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared, and the king said to Esther, what's your petition? It shall be granted. What's your request? Even half the kingdom, it shall be granted. Once that was done, after all of the teshuvah that the Jewish people were to do, because again, we need to establish the inner will. Now we have to go to the transcendent level, to the super rational. Esther invited Haman to a feast with the king by according him the distinction of dining with the royal couple. She led him to believe that he was in fact on their level. Now that she and her people were holding by the inner dimension of God's will, why? Because they had done the teshuvah, as we spoke about earlier, they did the fasting and the returning to God. She was able to elevate Haman to that level as well. At that dramatic point, the king realized Haman's true intentions to destroy the queen and rape her in front of him. So his true nature became exposed at its source. When Haman's ultimate nerve was exposed, he was thrown to the gallows. Interestingly, it is in this verse that God's name, which is not mentioned explicitly in the entire book of Esther, appears in the initial of the words, let the king and Haman come today. By revealing within him his absolute and essential bond with God, when the Jew connects his essential bond with God, the Jew wipes out any possibility of evil getting out of hand. This is the message of Purim. By taking all things to their root, the Jew eradicates evil automatically. So this is based on the mimer, the discourse of the Alter Rebbe. So it's quite a concept of really exactly what she was doing was all, shall we say, ordained mystically of bringing Haman up to the level to understand, right? So now the Jews have returned to God, and now let's see Haman at his source, at the level where he's with the king, with God, so to speak. Now we can see exactly what he's up to.
Rabbi, can you show those two sentences again, the last two
Sure.
sentences?
Sure. So in the words, I have here the actual discourse of the Alter Rebbe, which is Rabbi Moshe Yaakov Wisniewski put this all in a very, I think, a very comprehensible way. Sometimes it gets off into many much more esoteric ideas.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
Chabad.org, if you type in his name in the search engine, it'll come up all the daily thoughts for today based on his books.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
So it's also under daily wisdom if you're following along.
Beautiful.
Yeah, under
Quite
Chumash
a-
for the day.
He's
the
quite
daily
an
wisdom.
amazing translator. He renders a lot of things in an amazing way. And so the idea here is that we are meant to get from the innermost of God's name. And that's why the innermost of God's name is alluded to in this sentence, that made the king and Haman come today to celebrate. And not from the external name of God. Because at the external level, then negative can have an influence and be a force in the world. And this is, the Alter Rebbe continues this by saying, and this is not translated, but I'll just try to, we have a little bit more time, so I'll just do a little bit of the end of the discourse here. And this is why it says in the Gemara that a person is obligated to libisumi, to basically get high on Purim, until he doesn't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. Because because the whole fall of Haman was at this super rational level. And that's where he was trying to influence God, and that is where he fell from. And this level that is super rational. And that is why we get drunk on Purim. The Gemara says we are meant to get drunk on Purim till we don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai, because we are rising to that level that is beyond rational. It doesn't mean that a person becomes a fool and says the opposite of the truth. A person has to say, Arur Haman. You have to say that Haman is the one who is cursed. You're not going to say that Haman is blessed, God forbid, and you're not going to say the opposite about Mordechai. That's not what we mean here at all. But you realize that they're both coming from God himself at the essential level. And our joy and happiness is that which will prevail to such a degree that my joy is so great that I have no interest in this way or that way.
Rabbi,
Yes.
is this particular aspect of drinking until you can't tell the difference, is this supposed to be a tikkun for the party that Hashverosh threw?
Some say that. Yeah. That
Just
idea
like
is
he,
lost.
just like he became so drunk that he caused the death of his wife and started the entire process to run. This is sort of a culmination of this entire process.
Yeah, yeah. There are those that bring that interpretation.
Okay.
It's a little bit different than what Al Treb is saying here, but there are many good reasons. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Is that Ezra?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So it's all altogether a the idea of reaching simcha, reaching joy and happiness above what makes sense. This is a great level of joy, and it draws down tremendous blessing from above. So, any questions or comments on this discourse? We finished a little bit early today.
Well, I would enter the following thought that getting drunk, even to the level where it's not beyond, so to speak, quote unquote, that's destructive to the body. Why would it be a mitzvah to do something that is considered destructive to the body?
It's not. Adar. You're not supposed to get drunk. You have to get up to the point.
All right, there is
that. That's a standard rule.
What ad velo ad bichlal is not a standard application of ad. Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes not.
So there are those that interpret until you get so drunk that you don't know the difference. So some, just to explain what you just said, the word until, is that inclusive? Does that mean up to and including that level, or up to that level but not including that level? So Isaac is suggesting that it's up to but not including. In the Chassidic world, and many others as well, don't keep to that idea.
But differently,
Even the Mishnah Berurah does not maintain that interpretation. How do we know that? Because the Mishnah Berurah gives a very simple way to reach this. He says you should drink so much that you fall asleep. That you fall asleep, and when you're asleep, you're not conscious. You don't know the difference. But if it was only up to and not including, you wouldn't need to go to sleep, right? So I think the simple application and understanding of that is really up to and including. Now, here's the thing.
The
If you study,
Chassidim do it together with a Rebbe. They do it in a kosher environment where they're singing, they're talking to each other. They
Right.
don't do it the way we do it, but the way the ones who are doing it, going out into the street, getting high, carrying on, that's not a Jewish thing.
I haven't seen that, but unfortunately, I haven't gotten around a lot.
I used to bail them out.
Used to bail them out. I gotcha. Where was this, in Brooklyn?
And no, and here in Miami, whatever. I was
Right. Listen,
involved with Aleph. I saw all the trouble we get into.
we could talk from today until forever about how this is going to be misapplied, and especially when you're talking about the youth, right? I mean, tell young people, right? And you don't have to tell them, they'll read it themselves, right? And how are they going to apply this? Well, even if you don't tell this to them, they might apply it this way, right? How much more so? But I want to offer another possibility, that sometimes we need to just take a little l'chaim to shift our perspective and realize that Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai are equal. So with a higher level of consciousness, we need to drink a very little. You might only need to smell the vodka, and you could reach this level of joy and happiness.
Just count it up.
You don't have to drink a lot. You can drink very little, and at that very little level, you're shifted. But we have to be willing to do that. So,
Witness to yeshivas, yeshiva katana, where the talmidim are encouraged to drink, and they don't have the maturity to
I
control themselves.
I don't think that's happening anymore. For the last 15, 20 years, the whole community has become much more cognizant of the ills of alcohol and alcoholism in particular, and binge drinking and all of these things. And I don't believe that there are many schools that are encouraging this anymore because of all of the, the occupational hazards. There was maybe a time when there was greater maturity and we were able to handle it more, but today is not that time. David, please.
I was in a Farbringen of the Rebbe, must have been around 1980, and there was a simultaneous translation of the Rebbe's Farbringen. And when the Rebbe came to the part that a person has to be drunk enough on Purim that he doesn't know the difference between blessed be Mordechai and cursed be Haman, the translator translated as that a person has to be so drunk that he doesn't understand the difference between blessed be Haman and cursed be Mordechai.
Oh my goodness. He must have already reached it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's that's funny. I mean, it's certainly not what the Rebbe said, right? Interesting. So listen, everyone here, I think we're safe in this group. No one's going to go too crazy. But the point is not to go crazy. The point is to get out of ourselves and to get into the will of Hashem. That's really the point. And
Isaac can bail us out.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. Arur Haman has the same gematria as Baruch Mordechai.
So some people say you have to get so drunk that you can't figure out that gematria, so that your computing functions are compromised. But again, that's not the simple understanding of it. But whatever, however people are going to do it, and I think really with this mimer, with this discourse, and with Chassidus altogether, one can get high on the concept and idea, and one need not drink at all. And you can be totally joyous and totally out of yourself, and you don't know the difference between Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai, just in your head. So we don't need to do any harm to the body. We can rise up in our consciousness to the super rational level.
Amen.
I wish everyone a very joyous Purim, and God willing, even before Purim already, God will break down the walls of our exile, and we'll all be celebrating Purim on Wednesday in Jerusalem.
Amen.
All right.
All right.
Well, bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everybody.